Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another video. So for today's video, I'm revisiting another topic. We're going to be talking about more games that peak early. I really had fun making that last list, and I actually did come up with 10 more games that, in my opinion, do actually peak early. Now, if you're unfamiliar what that term means, peaking early, I'm talking about the games where you start the game up and you're just like, wow, this is incredible, this is great, it has an amazing intro, great first few hours, maybe even the first half, first 60% of the game is just an amazing time, but at some point, usually around the halfway mark or a little after, the game's quality really just starts to decline. Sometimes the gameplay's just kind of falling apart, sometimes it has to do with the story, but by the time you get to the end of the game, you're like, yeah, that was a good game, but man, the beginning half, the first few hours, the intro, that was amazing. That was the best the game ever got, hence the term peak. So yeah, today's video is about 10 more games that in my opinion peak in the first 50%, the first half, the intro's the best part, and that later half, it's just not as good. I'm not saying any of these games are bad. I think all of the games I'm talking about today are good to great. Some are actually even really great. It's just when it comes to their quality, yeah, it's a little lopsided, you know, the first half, it really is the best half. As a warning with a video like this, there is going to be some spoilers on these games. I know I don't usually spoil games, but it kind of can't be helped. So if you see a game that you don't want to be spoiled on, just skip ahead to the next game. But anyway, I don't want to delay this list any further. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below of some more games that you think peak early, or if you agree or disagree. I'll be lurking down below as I always am. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Shout out to all my patrons. Thank you all so very much. What's the first game we're talking about? Oh boy, I am starting out strong today. I have Need for Speed Underground 2. I know I'm usually bitching about Underground 1, but today I'm going to be complaining about Underground 2. Don't get it twisted, Underground 2 is a great game, one of the best Need for Speed games of them all, one of the best racing games of the 2000s, but this is a pretty clear-cut example of a game that peaks early in my opinion. When you start Underground 2, oh, it's so much fun. You get your first car, you're customizing it, you're exploring the map, you're really learning the ins and outs, you're taking in the environment and the atmosphere, the music's incredible, and it's just a ton of fun, and you're immediately like, man, this is one of the best racing games ever, and then you play more of it, and you realize it keeps going and going and going, and by a certain point, you realize while Underground 2 is really good, those first few hours, the first half of the game is much better than the second half. The second half of Underground 2, I'll just be honest, it becomes a repetitive slog filled with some terrible rubber banding, trial and error, and I don't think most people actually ever beat Underground 2 because not only does the game actually get pretty challenging, but they just make you do so many events in the second half of the game, especially towards the end. It's just event after event after event, and it's like all of these events you've done at least once. You've driven across this map dozens, if not hundreds of times. It's not really coming up with any new content. You're not really getting all that much better when it comes to your vehicles. Like, you're already hitting like top speeds. You've got some really cool ass vehicles, and they really have been, you know, tricked out. This is as awesome as they're going to get. And I get it, you want some events so, you know, you can enjoy the cool ass car you just customized and made, but like, this just keeps going and going, and it gets so repetitive towards the end. Like, I really struggled to finish Underground 2, and I genuinely really love the game. Those first few hours, the first like 6 to 10 hours, it's awesome. Learning the map, upgrading my vehicles, constantly going faster and getting better and being able to make them look cool as shit. This was awesome. These gameplay loops are great, but once you get towards the end of the game, it just gets so old. This gameplay gets incredibly stale. You know the map like the back of your hand, which is nice, but I don't think this game really has the gameplay or the variety to keep it all that interesting or engaging, and yeah, that's why I feel that it becomes repetitive towards the end of the game, and I think the first half of Underground 2 is the best part of Underground 2. If you asked me what I think most people's fond memories are of Underground 2, it's probably what I described. You know, they boot the game up, they play it for a few hours, maybe like 5 to 10 hours, and then they play something else. Because I think if most people played all the way through to the end, they would see that it gets rather repetitive and stale at the end. And this isn't a problem exclusive to Underground 2. I think plenty of other Need for Speed games have this issue as well. I just think Underground 2's is like the most prevalent. Underground 1 absolutely has it. Most Wanted even kind of has it. And I would say that's like the best Need for Speed game of them all. These games kind of just overstay their welcome, which definitely is going to be a video in the future, but until then I'll just say Underground 2 peaks in the first few hours. And so here we have Crysis 1. I feel like it's been a while since I talked about Crysis. Now Crysis, funny enough, actually suffers from the same pacing issues that Crytek's previous game Far Cry 1 suffer from. I talked about Far Cry 1 as a game that peaked early. Crysis 1 I could really say almost the exact same thing about it. Obviously, the setting and story are very different, and the gameplay is rather different. Crysis is more advanced, you have more options, but when it comes to the pacing and peaking early, yeah, it's super similar to the first Far Cry. When you start the game, you're dropped into these huge open environments, and you're told to take on these soldiers, and there's so many different ways that you can take them on. You can be stealthy, you can run in guns blazing, you can fuck with them in the physics, which are actually pretty good. You can drive a car into their base. There are so many different ways you can approach really every single encounter, and it's just this open sandbox that is a ton of fun. However, around the 50, maybe 60% mark, you actually get involved with aliens, and you start fighting aliens in Crysis, and I'll be real, these encounters kinda suck in comparison to the soldiers. Like, they're not terrible. It's just there's no room for freedom here. It's nowhere near as fun to fight these aliens. They're all kind of bullet spongy. There's not really any different ways to take them on. You just kind of take them head on. You just go into armor mode or maybe speed mode to dash around them, but you got to take them all on basically the exact same way. The sandbox literally disappears. Somebody just dumped water on the whole thing, and now you're just fighting the aliens, and you do that the last like 40-50% of the game. And whenever I replay Crysis 1, I usually just stop when the aliens show up because I really enjoy the sandbox gameplay. I think this is when Crysis is at its absolute best, and when the aliens show up, it's not bad. These encounters aren't garbage, and it doesn't ruin the game. It's just the first half, it's really good shit. The second half it's alright. So here we have Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. Obviously mega spoilers here. I recently just played through this game, and I gotta say, when it comes to the Ace Attorney games that I've played through, at least, I think the pacing is actually pretty good, constantly building things up, and then usually a very eventful, dramatic final case. Except in Apollo Justice. This game, it doesn't do that. There's 4 cases in Apollo Justice, and I'll just be upfront, the first case is significantly better than all of the other cases, to the point where it's not even funny. This first case sees Apollo defending his mentor, Phoenix Wright, and this entire case is not only bonkers, but it's funny, it's dramatic, it has a lot going on, and it's incredibly memorable. And after you finish it, you're just like, oh boy, what's the next amazing case Apollo's gonna go on? Is it gonna be better than the last? How do they top this? Well, spoiler alert, they don't top it. The second case is okay, the third case is also okay, and the fourth case, it is actually good, but it never reaches the high of that first case. The first case just has so much crazy shit going on, and it's just so incredibly unpredictable that, like, I couldn't take my eyes off it. I had to see what was going to happen next, and the rest of the game absolutely does not have that. In fact, the fourth case, one of the reasons it's good, or at least as good as it is because it relates a lot back to the first case. The first case really was just peak. The first case is one of the better cases in all of the Ace Attorney games, in my opinion. It's easily the best first case of any Ace Attorney game that I've ever played. Certainly not as funny as the first case in the original game, but I think this is a great first case. Unfortunately though, the game is really never able to live up to this quality again. I don't think the plot or the writing just gets anywhere near as compelling as it is in the first few hours of this game, and the whole time I just kept going like, is it gonna get as good as that first case? Is it gonna get as good? And it never did. The last case is interesting, and it actually does have some pretty good stuff in it, but it's not the first case. And so here we have Transformers Devastation, a game I've talked quite a lot. Okay, we're not actually talking about Transformers Devastation. Instead, we have another likely suspect. We have Mafia 3. I have talked about this game ad nauseum at this point on the channel, but I still think it's a good game to talk about when it comes to games that peak early. For the unfamiliar, Mafia 3 is widely considered a middling, repetitive, mediocre experience with an amazing story, visuals, and soundtrack, but generally dull gameplay that gets very stale very quickly. And for all of these reasons, I think Mafia 3 peaks early. The story is great throughout. That's not really what I have an issue with. When it comes to peaking early, I'm talking specifically about the gameplay here. When you start Mafia 3, you're like, damn, this gunplay is really good. The guns feel great, the cover system's great, the enemy AI isn't terrible either. You do some cool set pieces in the first few missions, and then you get dropped into the open world, and you're like, wow, this is a really cool setting. This is a cool open world. Why do people not like this game? And then you do some of the open world activities, and you're like, yeah, this is okay. I'm taking on some gang leaders. It's not amazing, but it's fine. What else is there in the game? And then you play more and more and more of it, and you realize that's like the entire game. You realize the kind of dull open world activities that feel more like side missions than main missions are a majority of the game. And while it's fine doing this the first few hours or even the first half of the game, it does become very repetitive and stale, and you wish that the game had any more variety or had more linear missions. And there are linear missions sprinkled throughout the game, and these are good when they show up. It's just There's not enough of them, and the open world gameplay really just can't stand up on its own. If there was more variety with it, or better yet, there was just less of it that you had to do and the game was just straight up shorter, I think the game would have been a much better experience. I think the first half is way better because it isn't super stale and repetitive, and by the end of the second half, you're just waiting for it to be over. I still think this game is alright, but I feel like the more and more you play of it, the less you're going to like it. So here we got a horror game. As much as I could sit here and dunk on Resident Evil 7 the same way I did with 8, instead I'm going to be talking about The Quarry. When it comes to most of Supermassive's games, I feel like they kind of suffer from this issue, but none of them have it more than The Quarry in my opinion. The Quarry is about all of these teenagers getting together at the end of a summer camp when, I'll just say, something happens. The first half of the game is very interesting. You're really learning about these characters, you're getting familiar with them, and then I will just say something happens and there's a bunch of intrigue and mystery and the game becomes a lot more exciting. Then around the 50 to 60% mark, it's pretty clear what's going on here. And I'll be real, the last third of the game, I just don't think it's anywhere near as interesting as the first half. Like, you already know what's going on, you're understanding, you're probably able to predict what's going to happen next, and that mystery, that intrigue, all of that excitement, it's just not there like it was in the first few hours and the first, again, half of the game. I'm not saying it's bad. I think the second half of The Quarry is still good outside of the ending. The ending kind of sucks in this game. Okay, it doesn't kind of suck. It straight up blows fucking chunks for breakfast. It is not very good, but I just wasn't as intrigued, I wasn't invested, I wasn't as engaged with it as I was the first half, and I know I'm not alone. I know a lot of people just kind of give up on The Quarry in the second half or they stop caring, and I don't think it's to that extent, but this is one of those horror games where once you know the twist, once you know exactly what's going on, I feel like it's just not as exciting and you're just kind of waiting for it to end. It climaxes a little early in my opinion. Usually when a good horror movie or game climaxes, there's not much left after that. Or if there is, there's usually actually a bigger twist that you didn't see coming, but this game, at times it feels like it kind of just blows its load early, and instead of it becoming a fun night of passionate lovemaking, it really just becomes a nut and cut. If you know, you know. Maybe that was a pretty crude example, so I apologize for that. What I'm trying to say is that I was really invested the first half of the game, and by the second half I was like, this is good, but it doesn't capture the vibe or atmosphere that the first half had, and I was just kind of ready for it to end. It's not as good as Until Dawn, and I don't think it'll ever be as good as Until Dawn. I'm sure this one's going to get a little bit of pushback, but before you unsubscribe and call me cringe, maybe just hear me out. I have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, Breath of the Wild, it is a masterpiece. It is a fantastic game. It is excellent, and I'm not denying the amazing legacy that it's left behind. But I think if you ask most people when they thought the game was at its best, they're probably going to tell you that it was during the first half. It might not be the introduction where you're stuck on the island, but I think most people would tell you that their favorite part of the game, or what they believe to be the best part, is towards the beginning half of the game, or it's when you fight Ganon at the end. When you fight Ganon at the end, that shit is awesome, but when it comes to me and a lot of other people, I think the game really does peak in the first half of the game. When you first get into that big open world, when you start doing the shrines, when you're exploring around, when you do the first few of those big story moments, or you do the first few divine beasts, that's when I think the game is at its absolute best, where you're just getting used to all of the tools they've given you, you're really thinking of creative problem solving, you're just exploring the world, you're taking it all in, you're learning about it, you're taking in the atmosphere and the environment, and you're really taking advantage of the freedom they give you. You can go anywhere you want at any point, and you can even go fight Ganon. He's gonna be hard as shit, but you can go do it. This is when I think the game really is at its best. I think when you start the game and the first, half of the game, it is just so exhilarating. It's so much fun. But I think most people at some point start to get a little tired of the open world. Like, it's an amazing open world with a lot of attention to detail, but man, this shit is massive. And exploring all of it, getting around all of it, it takes a long ass time. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, I started to get a bit tired just exploring everywhere I possibly could. Like, when I started the game, I was like, I want to explore like every nook and cranny. I want to try to do all of the shrines. But by like the second half, I was just like, man, I'm just going for the divine beast and then I'm going to go beat the game. Like, I'm getting kind of sick of this open world. Maybe that's just a me thing, maybe it's a you thing also. As always, you can let me know down below if you agree or disagree. Breath of the Wild is a massive game. It took me well over like 50 hours to complete, so yeah, that first half, air quotes, is like 20 to 30 hours, but I just think it's one of those games that when you start it, it feels incredible, it is incredible, and there's so many limitless possibilities, and you're going to want to do everything and see everything, but by the second half, you're just like, I'm just gonna go finish the game at this point. But hey, I know there are plenty of people that are not like this at all. They really just felt the magic in that first half and think that it carried all the way through to the very end. And if you're one of those people, more power to you. I'm sure plenty of people will be like, that was Tears of the Kingdom for me. For me personally, I just went into it knowing that it was going to be this massive open world. And I don't know, it didn't feel like it peaked early for me. That game was pretty consistent with its quality throughout, and there's one amazing moment in Tears of the Kingdom where I was like, this shit is hype. This is like the best moment in almost any 3D Zelda game, and that was not in the first half. So I'm just sticking to Breath of the Wild for today, and hopefully y'all don't want to throw bricks through my window. So here we got an interesting one. We have Middle-earth Shadow of War. Now, I think Shadow of War is a pretty good game, and it's easily the best modern Lord of the Rings game. Not even close, in my opinion. And the game absolutely takes advantage of its amazing Nemesis system that was unfortunately patented, but this is one of those games that, in my opinion, it just goes on too long. And not only does it go on too long, the second half of the game just kind of becomes this repetitive, dull slog, especially if we're talking about all of the battles at the end of the game. I know a lot of people say that's endgame and that the real game ends before that. No, like the final boss is tied to all of these battles, the real ending is tied to all of these battles, and you're going to need to train up your orcs, and you're going to need to do, I think it's like 10 battles in a row. It's just some ridiculous number, and you realize that if you look at the overall play time, like a third, maybe more of this game is these battles at the end of the game. I remember when I played through this game back when it came out, and the first half I was like, this game is amazing. This is fantastic. This might be the best Lord of the Rings game of them all. It's such an improvement on the first game. And then I got towards the end of the game, the second half, and I was like, yeah, it is still pretty good. And then I got to the battles and I was like, man, this game was good. What happened? And I'm not saying that the battles or the last half of the game is unenjoyable and awful and shouldn't even be experienced, but I didn't feel the highs that I was experiencing with the first half. The character progression is great in the first half, the maps aren't too big, you constantly are getting stronger, you're getting better and better orcs, and the game is just mad fun. The second half, yeah, they kind of suck the fun out of it. They have you do so many battles in a row, and it honestly just starts to get a bit repetitive. It starts getting old, it starts getting stale. You don't really want to do a bunch more battles. You don't want to have to level up your orcs a bunch more, and then if one of them dies, oh, it's all bad news. But the game just throws battle and battle and battle, and I know they wanted you to like spend money on the microtransactions and all that bullshit. I know that was taken out eventually, but the game is still mad grindy at the end of the game, and it's one of those examples, in my opinion, where the game just excelled in the first half. Like, the first half, it's some of the best open world gameplay from that era, but by the time I was done with the game went from, wow, this is amazing, to, yeah, it's just pretty good. And it's because the first half, man, I feel like the quality was really high up and it just declines the more you play this game. The story also kind of gets stupider and stupider, but I know a lot of people don't exactly play this game for the story. I still enjoy the game overall, but I feel like it could have been a lot better if it was just shorter. I feel like I've brought that up a few times, especially recently. I think one of my upcoming videos will be games that overstay their welcome, and this is probably going to be one of them. So here's one that might have you scratching your head, but I have Mega Man, like as an entire series. Which series? I'm talking about the classic series and some of the X games. I'm sure you're probably like, what exactly are you talking about, Tubular? Do you even know what Mega Man's about? Yeah, I know what it's about. It's about you taking on the Robot Masters and then doing the Wily stages, or the main antagonist stages, if it's the X games. And this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I've always thought that Mega Man levels are the best when you're taking on the Robot Masters. There's plenty of good Wily levels, especially in some of the better Mega Man games, but if you ask most people, I think they're going to tell you their favorite stages are the Robot Masters. The Wily stages, while usually good in their own right, are just nowhere near as creative, innovative, or imaginative as the Robot Master stages. Usually they just recycle gimmicks or occasionally come up with something new. But I think most Mega Man games really excel when you're taking on the Robot Masters. That's really the focus of most Mega Man games. And sure, you could say like 90% of these games are the Robot Masters, but I actually disagree. Usually there's 8 Robot Masters and then there's like 3 or 4 Wily stages. So is it really only like 10% of the game that's the Wily stages? I would say like 2/3 of the game are the Robot Masters, and then the last third are the Wily stages. But in my opinion, yeah, the Robot Masters are way better levels than the levels that come after it. And this isn't for every single Mega Man game, it's just a common theme I've noticed across several Mega Man games. And I'll keep it 100 with y'all. There's been a lot of times I replay these Mega Man games, and when I get to the Wily stages, I just stop playing them. I'd rather just play the Robot Master stages. The game's just not as fun in my opinion after that. It certainly gets challenging. Usually Mega Man games are very difficult in those last few stages. But anyway, that's my Mega Man discussion. Hopefully I can rank these games sooner than later. I can tell that a lot of y'all really do want me to actually talk about these games. So here's one I haven't talked about in quite some time, and that is Brutal Legend. I will just immediately say that I really enjoy Brutal Legend. I love the game's story, its music, its vibe, its setting. It's very different from legit like any other video game ever made, and I hope one day we can get a sequel, but I'm very doubtful. However, I am absolutely one of those people that believes Brutal Legend has a much better first half than the second half. The first half has you driving around this open world, you're exploring, you're doing some of the kind of basic hack and slash combat, you're freeing everybody, you're learning about the story and Eddie and all of that, and then they start to introduce real-time strategy elements and the game actually becomes more of an action RTS. And then once you really get into the second half, especially deep into the second half, the game becomes basically only an action real-time strategy game. That is the only gameplay style that really stands here, and while I think it is good, I just didn't love that it shifted to really being only this gameplay. Any variety is pretty much gone. The open world just really kind of closes up and it all focuses on these big epic battles. And yeah, they are cool and there are some set pieces. They can even get a little challenging. The RTS gameplay is decently well thought out, but I just simply enjoyed the first half of this game more, when the battles weren't super big and complex and it wasn't the only gameplay of this game. Like, the game is still very good and I have played through it a couple times now. It's just whenever it starts being really only an action RTS, I just don't like the gameplay as much. Maybe it's because I have a bias towards real-time strategy games, but I've seen a lot of people say that while they really do like this game and the music and the atmosphere, they just didn't like that it became mostly an RTS game. It wasn't what they were expecting at all, and I really wasn't expecting it either. This one, it's a bit tricky. Like, I'm always going to praise the game, I'm always going to recommend the game, but just know that the second half, the gameplay just completely changes from what you're doing the first half. And it's not exactly for the better. At least the music is awesome all the way throughout though. Like, this game, the soundtrack, it really is just kind of goated. Alright, and to wrap things up, I just had to bring it up, Far Cry 3. I talked about Far Cry 1 in the first part, man, I just kept thinking about Far Cry 3 after I did that video. Once Voss dies, man, the game just is nowhere near as good. And I know plenty of people will be like, oh, Voss dies and then there's only like an hour left of the game. No, there's a good like third of the game left after Voss dies. You go to like another island and you take on Hoyt and he's just not very exciting. And I think the story really just kind of falls off. I don't think the gameplay necessarily falls off. I mean, it's the excellent Far Cry 3 gameplay and you even get to like fly around. It's not as good, man, as that first half. Voss was just such an incredible antagonist. He really is this game's identity. He low-key is Far Cry's identity, and then they just kill him off like 2/3 into the game, and it's like, huh, did I just hit the climax there? Did the game just peak right there? Yeah, the game peaked right there. It doesn't ever get any better than that. And while they try to make Hoyt interesting or decent or at least memorable, in my opinion he's memorable because he's not memorable. He's just not Voss. Like, no Far Cry villain is Voss. Sure, the antagonists of 4, 5, and 6, especially 6, are actually pretty good. None of them have ever been Voss. When it comes to gameplay, like I said, I don't think Far Cry 3 really peaks in the beginning. I think Far Cry 3 actually is just very good throughout. This is one of the like only Ubisoft games I've actually 100%ed because I really did just love it all the way through. But this was also, you know, when the formula was still fresh. This is more from a narrative perspective. I think Far Cry 3 has an amazing intro. Like, the intro is so good. It has a great middle. And then, yeah, the ending, it's just kind of there in the endings. In particular, I also thought kind of just blew chunks. I think Far Cry 3 is still a fantastic game. It's maybe the best of the whole Far Cry series. It kind of just maybe peaked right here. But man, once Voss is gone, it always just makes me so sad. Like, why? Why did they do this? Anyway, that's it for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I was just talking about some more games that peak early. Let me know down below what video topics you want to see me cover next. I'm still not working a cringe cog 9 to 5, so I'm just working on videos pretty much all day. If you made it to this part of the video, comment bricks down below is what you hopefully don't throw through my window, and I really appreciate you all watching. Like, seriously, thank you so much, and super shout out to everybody that joined the stream. That was amazing. Thank you all very much. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, y'all.